They robbed trains in broad daylight. They laughed while sheriffs chased their dust. And when the Pinkertons swore to bring them down, they vanished only to reappear in South America. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid were not just outlaws. They were legends. And their final days in Bolivia remain one of the greatest mysteries of the Wild West. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Outlaws of the Wild West, where every week we bring you true crime legends of the frontier. Hit that button now, because this story isn't just about crime. It's about loyalty, betrayal, and a last stand that echoes through history. Robert Leroy Parker was born in 1,866 inches Beaver, Utah, a hard town of dry fields, long winters, and work that started at sunup and ended when the lamps went out. His parents were Mormon settlers who believed in scripture, fences, and keeping one's head down. The boy who would become Butch Cassidy learned all of that, and something else. The West rewards those who move a half step faster than the trouble behind them. He was handy more than holy. He could fix a latch with a pocket knife, settle a skittish colt with a whisper, and talk an angry shopkeeper down from a fight with a grin and a promise. On errands to town, he studied the men at the hitching rail, ranch hands, gamblers, and riders who looked at lawmen with a sideways smile. The West became a school, and he paid attention. In his late teens, he drifted with the seasons. Provo, Rock Springs, mining camps where men came to win or bleed. Somewhere on those roads, he crossed trails with a cattle thief named Mike Cassidy, a fox quiet rider whose hat brim shaded his eyes. Mike had rules: steal from the big spreads that squeezed small homesteads off the water. Steal quick. Leave clean. Never shoot a man who gives up his stock. He didn't preach. He demonstrated. Robert watched, learned, and felt a principle take root. Take the money, not the life. The fewer bullets, the longer you ride. He worked odd jobs between lessons. For a spell, he swung a cleaver in a butcher's shop, apron greasy, wrist strong from chopping. Cowhands started calling him Butch, and the name stuck like tallow. Out of respect and camouflage, he borrowed Mike's surname too. Robert Leroy Parker rode out as Butch Cassidy. A pattern formed. Work a while, move on, ride fence, move on. He didn't swagger or snarl. He floated. Confidence was his weapon. He believed the safest robbery was the one no one wanted to fight. Men who planned lived longer than men who shot first. Study habits, learn timetables, seed the trail with fresh horses, and the odds lean your way. Telluride was the proof. The San Miguel Valley Bank sat on a dusty street where wagons rattled and miners traded gold dust for paper. On a soft day in 1889, 3 riders came easy and tied off. The kind of men towns ignore until it's too late. Inside, the bank smelled of ink and coin. A clerk looked up and met a revolver as steady as a sermon. Butch was courteous. He didn't shout. He said, "Please," when he told the cashier to open the safe, and "Thank you," when the man's trembling hands obeyed. Outside, a partner idled on the boardwalk, palm near a colt. Another kept the horses, deep-chested animals that stamped and blew. The job moved like a dance. Bags open, drawers emptying, a clock ticking loud enough for everyone to hear a heartbeat. When the last bundle hit canvas, Butch tipped his hat. "Don't be foolish," he said. What a careful man says when he'd rather not shoot anyone. Then they were gone. Not a wild gallop. Butch hated panic. A steady trot to the edge of town, a turn up the trail, a switch of horses waiting where a creek curled behind cottonwoods. They had scouted it all. A ravine to hide hoofprints, a shallow ford to keep splash low, a shelf road where 2 rifles could stall 10 men. When the posse finally organized enough anger to ride, the trail had cooled to silence. Telluride erupted. Some cursed the insult to order. Others laughed. Newspapers did what newspapers do. They invented. They called the leader Butch, and the name galloped ahead of him like a scout. They called him a genius, a hooligan, a gentleman, a plague. Every headline polished the mask he would wear for the next decade. Butch read and smiled. Papers were free advertising. They frightened the timid and recruited the bold. The best men, steady riders who could keep a secret, found him. Reputation became leverage. A thief who didn't spill blood made guards less eager to be heroes. Whisper travels faster than lead. He wasn't yet the architect of a famous gang, but the blueprint lived in his habits. Case the job for weeks. Place relay horses along the route. Cultivate friendships at the edge of the law, so a rancher's wife left hot bread on the back stoop and a blacksmith shod a borrowed gelding, no questions asked. If a sheriff was honest, outrun him. If a sheriff was crooked, outthink him. At night on the high desert, Butch talked about the future with whichever partner shared the fire. The West was changing. Fences stitched the open range. Telegraph lines zipped news across distances that used to swallow sheriffs whole. Railroads moved money faster than horses, and the men who owned those rails hired detectives who didn't tire. If a man wanted to live free, he had 2 choices. Break the new rules so cleverly they barely noticed, or ride past the horizon to where the rules hadn't caught up. He also kept a code. Don't rob a small-town bank that holds grocery money. Don't terrorize women and children. Don't kill a man who raises his hands. It wasn't sainthood. It was strategy. Terror closes doors. Restraint opens them. A gentleman bandit passes where a butcher can't. And if the papers want a folk hero, hand them a silhouette they can mythologize. By the early 1890s, sheriffs in 3 states cursed the same name. Butch kept 1 saddlebag for ammunition and 1 for clean shirts. The bank will get more, he'd tell a sweating clerk with a half smile, and sometimes the man believed him. He didn't drink to blackout or gamble to ruin. His vices were horses and horizons, things that run and things that recede. Riders fell in with him and fell away. These first years were rehearsal. He studied how fear moves through a crowd, how courage arrives late. He learned payroll cycles, the lazy habits of conductors who trusted routine, the counties where telegraph keys clicked slow, the towns where deputies played cards at noon. He learned which deserts erased tracks and which creeks kept a secret. He built routes the way some men build houses. A rumor kept finding him. A quiet Pennsylvanian who sat a horse like a hawk, rides wind, eyes cool, trigger finger cold. Harry Alonzo Longabaugh, the Sundance Kid. The first time Butch heard the name, he repeated it under his breath, testing the grain. He didn't know the man. He respected the sound of him. Some names arrive with their own weather. Between jobs, Butch could vanish into respectability, working a ranch under an alias, or drifting to a town where no one looked twice at a courteous stranger. He could step into a room and lower its temperature by talking softly. People trusted him because he acted as if trust were natural. Weeks later, they'd hear a bank had been hit 100 miles away and wonder, luck ends. The country was tightening. The gaps where an honest thief could breathe were closing. Pinkerton detectives were reading the same headlines and taking notes. Railroad barons do not like to be embarrassed. A day was coming when careful plans and good horses wouldn't be enough. On that day, another kind of asset would matter. A partner whose nerve matched his own. which is another way of saying he would need Sundance. By the mid-1890s, Butch Cassidy had walked himself out of boyhood and into the foyer of legend. He had a name the presses loved, a code even enemies respected, and a blueprint for robberies that felt like stage plays. He had also acquired, somewhere between the butcher's block and the bank vault, a sense that his life was running toward an edge. At that edge waited a partnership, two riders, different as moonlight and flint, about to step into the same shadow and make it famous. When their paths finally crossed, the West itself would lean in to listen. Harry Alonzo Longabaugh was born far from the deserts and canyons of outlaw fame in Pennsylvania, 1867. But the boy did not belong to factories or brick streets. He belonged to horses, horizons, and the restless pull of the West. By his teens, he had drifted to Colorado, then to the Dakota Territory, where land stretched wide and law stretched thin. He was tall, lean, with eyes that measured distance as if everything he saw might one day need shooting. He had a quiet manner, almost polite, but when his revolver cleared leather, the silence ended fast. His first prison term came young. Arrested in 1887 for stealing a horse in Sundance, Wyoming. He served 18 months, and when he walked free, he carried two things with him: a hatred for confinement and a new name. They called him the Sundance Kid. By the mid-1890s, Butch Cassidy was already whispered across 3 states. A gentleman bandit, they said. A thief who tipped his hat while cleaning out bank drawers. A strategist who preferred wit over bullets. He needed riders who could think as fast as they shot. Men who wouldn't panic when the plan bent under pressure. Reputation drew them drifters, rustlers, men tired of scraping a living on the edges of big ranch empires. That's how Butch and Sundance crossed trails. Accounts differ. Some say Wyoming, others New Mexico. What matters is that when they shook hands, the chemistry was immediate. Butch, the thinker; Sundance, the trigger. Two halves of an equation that terrified banks and railroads alike. If Butch was the brain, Sundance was the nerve. Butch valued restraint, the art of leaving men alive so fear could spread faster than grief. Sundance carried steel in his silence, and when lead was required, his hand never wavered. The West had seen gangs before, but never this pairing charm and calculation riding side by side with cold precision. Their partnership started small. A bank here, a payroll there. Sundance tested Butch's philosophy. Case the target, learn the rhythms, pick the moment when guards are lazy. Butch tested Sundance's quickness. Could he cover a retreat, hold a line, shoot only when necessary? The answer was yes. More than yes. The kid was lightning wrapped in patience. In Montpelier, Idaho, they rode quiet into town one June morning. Butch walked into the bank as if he were there to deposit a check. Sundance lounged outside, hat low, posture casual but ready. Inside, Butch leaned over the counter with a smile. "You'll want to open that safe, friend." The teller, staring into calm eyes above a drawn revolver, did just that. By the time the town stirred, the riders were gone, galloping toward horses staged at relay points. The haul wasn't just money, it was proof. The formula worked. Each job became smoother, cleaner. They robbed like engineers drafting a blueprint. When violence came, it was sharp, surgical, never wasted. The West began to realize this was not a pack of hot-headed rustlers. This was something new. Reputation as a magnet. By 1896, Other outlaws gravitated to Butch and Sundance. Elsie Lay, a loyal friend who could outdrink and outshoot most men. The Logan brothers, with tempers as short as their gun barrels, and Ben the tall Texan Kilpatrick, a hulking presence in any posse. Together they formed what the papers would call the Wild Bunch. They weren't the first outlaw gang in the frontier, but they were the most organized, the most disciplined, and to the fury of lawmen the most successful. They studied rail schedules, bribed informants, rehearsed escape routes. They left towns talking not just about stolen money, but about how damn smoothly it all happened. Sometimes, after a robbery, Butch would linger in a saloon 100 miles away, buying drinks with coins the railroad swore had been lost. Lawmen knew. They couldn't prove. That was the game. In 1899, their legend burned into history. The Union Pacific Overland Flyer, a train heavy with express shipments, was scheduled through Wyoming. Butch and Sundance were waiting. Dynamite tore the express car open. Guards dropped weapons under the cool aim of revolvers, and thousands of dollars spilled into outlaw hands. When posses gave chase, they found only fresh horses waiting, trails vanishing into sagebrush, and rumors swirling in every canyon. The Wild Bunch rode as if the land itself conspired to protect them. What set them apart wasn't just daring, it was philosophy. Butch enforced his code. Don't shoot unless you must. The newspapers noticed. They called him the Robin Hood of the Rockies. Of course, the farmers never saw a dime of the money. But myth doesn't care for ledgers. Myth cares for style. Sundance, for his part, never argued the code, but he didn't romanticize it. He knew the West was sharpening. Sheriffs were upgrading rifles. Railroads were buying Pinkerton detectives who studied psychology as much as ballistics. The kid carried an understanding. When the time came, speed would matter more than style. That tension, Butch's restraint against Sundance's readiness, gave the gang balance. It also made them unpredictable. You never knew if you'd meet the smile or the bullet. By the turn of the century, the Wild Bunch had hit trains in Wyoming, banks in Nevada, payrolls in Montana. Each robbery fed the legend. Each escape humiliated the law. Rewards climbed. Newspapers splashed their names across front pages. Bandits ride again. Railroad outrage. The Wild Bunch strikes. Butch read every article. He clipped them, laughed over the exaggerations, and sometimes corrected details around the campfire. To him, the press was an ally, painting them as larger than life, making lawmen seem smaller, slower, less inevitable. To the Pinkertons, the clippings were fuel for a manhunt that would not end until blood touched dust. And yet, for a while, the gang lived charmed. In photographs, they posed in suits, cigars in hand, like respectable businessmen. They mailed those photos to friends. The arrogance was breathtaking. The confidence was real. They believed they were untouchable. But no outlaw rides forever. The more spectacular the robberies, the sharper the knives drawn against them. Pinkerton files swelled. Possess rode harder. The rewards grew irresistible. The Wild Bunch was no longer just a rumor in backwater towns. They were a national obsession. And obsession breeds hunters. The next chapter of their story would not be about building legend, but about defending it. Gunfights, betrayals, and the slow tightening of the noose. For Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the Wild West was running out of wilderness. The dawn of the new century brought with it steel, dynamite, and headlines. For the Wild Bunch, this was the moment when legend met spectacle. Banks and railroads carried more cash than ever before, guarded by armed men who believed iron safes and repeating rifles could stop hunger and ambition. They were wrong. It was June 2nd, 1899. The Union Pacific Overland Flyer slowed as it approached Wilcox, Wyoming, where a bridge creaked in the moonlight. The train hissed to a halt, lanterns swinging in the engineer's hand. What the crew did not know was that Butch Cassidy and the Wild Bunch were waiting in the shadows, dynamite heavy in their saddlebags. Masked riders swarmed the train. The engineer was forced off at gunpoint, shivering under the desert stars. A satchel of explosives was shoved into his hands. "Place it," they ordered. The men obeyed, setting the charge against the express car's door. The blast tore the night apart. Flames, splinters, iron hurled into the air. The door sagged open. The outlaws surged in, revolvers drawn, shouts sharp and quick. Bags of cash and stacks of gold were stuffed into canvas sacks. Guards who twitched saw cold steel an inch from their foreheads. Butch's rule held: no unnecessary blood. Still, the violence of the explosion spoke louder than bullets ever could. By the time a posse was organized, the Wild Bunch was gone, melting into the Wyoming plains. Relay horses waited at every 20 miles. Trails were erased. Creeks covered their tracks. By morning, the gang was smoke, rumor, and a mocking echo of laughter. Newspapers screamed the story coast to coast. The Wilcox train outrage. Rewards soared. The Union Pacific and the Pinkerton Detective Agency swore vengeance. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid were no longer just local criminals. They were national enemies. Flush with money and arrogance, the gang made a mistake that only deepened their myth. In Fort Worth, Texas, 1,900, the Wild Bunch dressed themselves in tailored suits, silk ties, polished boots. They sat for a portrait, cigars glowing, eyes defiant. The photo was sent to friends. Pinkertons got a copy too. They studied every detail: the tilt of a hat, the angle of a jawline. For lawmen, it was a roadmap. For the public, it was irresistible. The image spread across the country. Outlaws had never looked so clean, so bold, so untouchable. The press gave them nicknames. The Fort Worth Five. Children memorized the faces. Ballads carried their names across saloons and campfires. Butch and Sundance had crossed into celebrity. Fame, however, was a curse disguised as glory. Later that same year, they struck again. The Union Pacific, near Tipton, Wyoming. Another train, another dynamite charge, ripping iron like paper. Inside the express car, guards froze under the aim of revolvers. Cash boxes, bonds, and gold filled the outlaw saddlebags. Butch laughed as they rode into the night. "The railroad will get more," he reminded his men, echoing the words he had once spoken in dusty banks. To him, it was a philosophy. Money replenishes, lives do not, but Possez chased harder this time. Telegraph wires crackled the alarm within minutes. Towns rose up, sheriffs rode out. Pinkertons took the field. The Wild Bunch vanished into canyons, traded horses, crossed rivers, and once again slipped through the net. But the hunters were learning. Each escape narrowed the distance. Each robbery shortened their margin of safety. The Pinkerton Detective Agency had faced outlaws before the Reno Gang. Jesse James, the Daltons. Butch and Sundance were different. They weren't hot-headed gunfighters who drank away their spoils. They were professionals, calm, clever, organized. Detectives mapped their movements, tracked the sale of stolen bonds, questioned anyone who had seen a flash of cash in a saloon. Posses grew larger, rewards richer. Posters plastered train stations and frontier towns. Butch Cassidy, $10,000 reward. Sundance Kid, $10,000 reward. Dead or alive. Families who once offered bread at back doors now hesitated. Farmers who once cheered their defiance grew wary of harboring men hunted by Pinkertons. The outlaw code could not compete with the fear of federal reprisal. Butch saw it coming. Around campfires, he talked of leaving the United States altogether. South America, maybe. A place where law rode slower, where fences and telegraphs hadn't choked the horizon. Sundance listened, silent, eyes narrowed against firelight. He knew Butch was right, the circle was tightening. Before they fled, there were more robberies, more escapes. In 1901, near Wagner, Montana, the Wild Bunch hit a Great Northern train. Explosives roared again. Loot poured into canvas bags, and the outlaws scattered into the night. But cracks were showing. Members drifted away, killed in shootouts, jailed, or simply vanishing into obscurity. The Wild Bunch was not an army. It was a storm. Brilliant, violent, and destined to pass. Still, for a few shining years, they had made the railroads tremble and the Pinkertons sweat. They had carved their names into the bone of the frontier. By 1901, the United States was no longer safe ground. Rewards were too high, Pinkertons too relentless, and lawmen too eager for fame. Butch and Sundance stood at a crossroads. To stay meant eventual death in a gunfight. Another bloody headline. Another outlaw corpse dragged through town for photographs. To leave meant gambling everything on a foreign land, starting over in countries where language, law, and loyalty were strangers. And so the decision was made. South America beckoned. Argentina, Chile, Bolivia. A new stage for the old play, but history teaches a cruel lesson. An outlaw can change landscapes, but he cannot change fate. The story of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid was about to cross oceans and hurtled toward its final betrayal. The West was closing. Telegraph wires cut across the plains. Pinkertons shadowed every trail. And lawmen no longer rode alone. They rode with possess, armed with repeating rifles. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid saw the writing on the wall. America had grown too small for them. South America promised horizons untouched by law. New lands where the legend could start again. And so, in 1901, under assumed names, they sailed for Argentina. They called themselves James and Ryan, respectable ranchers, settlers. They purchased land in the Cholula Valley, a place of cold rivers, green meadows, and mountains that stabbed the sky. For a while, they played the role well. Neighbors knew them as courteous, hard-working. They raised cattle, planted roots. Photographs show them smiling beside Etta Place, Sundance's mysterious companion, her beauty the subject of whispers in every town they visited. But legends do not retire. The money drained, the itch returned. In 1905, near Rio Gallegos, Argentina, a bank was robbed clean by English-speaking bandits. Witnesses described politeness, efficiency, no wasted bullets. The whispers began. Could it be them? The Pinkertons thought so. They traced movements, studied accents, watched ships' logs. Soon the agency reported with certainty. The Wild Bunch had gone international, from Argentina to Chile. The robberies mounted. Payrolls disappeared. Stagecoaches were held up with the same calm charm Butch had perfected in Wyoming. Newspapers in Buenos Aires carried their stories just as American papers once had. They were global outlaws now, but time had shifted. South American lawmen were no less relentless, and the Pinkertons fed them intelligence. Rewards soared. Neighbors who once smiled now whispered. The circle was tightening again. In 1908, near Bolivia, The pair struck one of their last great hauls, a payroll meant for a mining company. The robbery was clean, the escape swift, but as always, the money ran out and the hunters closed in. Legends rarely fall to strangers. They fall to betrayal. A rumor reached authorities. Two gringos, suspiciously flush with cash, hiding near the town of San Vicente. Soldiers moved to surround a small adobe house. Inside, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid prepared their last stand. Night fell. Shots split the silence. Bolivian troops fired into the house. The outlaws answered, bullets sparking against stone walls. Villagers huddled, listening to the thunder. Hours dragged. Smoke choked the air. Inside, the partners spoke in low voices. Ammunition ran thin. Wounds bled. They had outrun the world, but no one outruns forever. One account says Butch, unwilling to be paraded in chains, made the final choice. He turned his revolver on Sundance, then on himself. Others claim they both fell in a hail of gunfire. The truth lies buried under Bolivian dust, disputed by witnesses, clouded by time. What matters is what followed. The soldiers entered at dawn. 2 bodies lay still. The names of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid were written into history that morning, not in America, but in a foreign land where their voices echoed last. Back home, newspapers gasped. Some mourned, some mocked, some refused to believe it. Rumors grew that they had survived, slipping away under new names, growing old in quiet obscurity. Even today, books argue, movies dramatize, researchers dig. But perhaps the uncertainty is the point. Legends are not supposed to end cleanly. They blur, they persist, they grow larger in the retelling. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid were more than thieves. They were symbols of defiance, of wit against power, of men who tried to bend a changing world to their will. Their robberies shook the West. Their escapes mocked the law. Their friendship, tested by fire, carried them across continents. And their deaths, whether in gunsmoke or rumor, ensured they would live forever in story. If you've listened this far, you've walked the final trail with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. A journey of grit, betrayal, and a legend that refuses to die. Subscribe now to Outlaws of the Wild West, where every week we bring you the untold stories of the frontier's most notorious legends. From train robbers to gunfighters, these are the tales that shaped America's lawless edge. Because in the Wild West, legends never die.